Taoiseach, at the end of February at Leaders' Questions, I raised the case of Maggie, a 10-year-old child in desperate need of mental health support. Maggie has endured cancer, suffers from depression, anxiety and self-injurious behaviour. She's in very serious distress. She doesn't leave the house except to go to school. Maggie was on an urgent list for over a year before getting a CAMHS meeting. An assessment for intellectual disability followed, but she wasn't accepted into the service because there's no specialist in her area. And now Maggie is in a mental health crisis because she hasn't received the care and support that she so badly needs. Her distraught mother came to the Oireachtas yesterday pleading for help for her daughter. She came in February here to make the same plea, but nothing has changed since then. Maggie is still not getting the care for which her mother has fought so hard and for so long. And she's not alone, Taoiseach. Maggie's mother was in the Oireachtas yesterday attending the launch of a report by Families for Reform of CAMHS, a group of more than 1,200 families whose children have been denied the services of CAMHS or who haven't received sufficient care. The report will be published tomorrow, but the group's presentation laid bare the full-blown emergency in the provision of child and adolescent mental health care. The report describes the dramatic increase in waiting lists, with so many children waiting more than a year to be accepted to CAMHS. The vast majority say their children deteriorated while waiting. Children with the dual diagnosis of an intellectual disability or autism and mental health, or those with ADHD, suicidal ideation or eating disorders are sent from pillar to post in search of support. Many parents report taking their children to the emergency department to receive care, and a staggering 69% of those parents surveyed have been forced to seek private care. This places a really unfair and a massive financial burden on parents, and many simply can't afford it. One parent who's quoted in the report had this to say: "It breaks my heart to think what kind of life she, the daughter, could have had if she wasn't thrown on the scrap heap because her parents couldn't afford an earlier diagnosis. Maybe that would have made the difference. We will never know." Taoiseach, these children and their families are crying out for help. They spend years knocking on the door of a system that's broken. Vulnerable children fall through ever-widening cracks. Tá cuairm sláinte meabhrach de leanaí agus de dhaoine óga in aircéim. Caithí an rialtas bart fiúntach a dhéanamh chun deireadh chur leis an scanal atá le seirbhísí. Taoiseach, I'd like to ask you to directly intervene at this point to ensure that Maggie gets the care she needs. I'd like you to make that commitment to her mother today. I want to ask for meaningful action to fix the broken system, and I think the first step has to be to lift the recruitment embargo so that CAMHS teams can be filled and waiting lists tackled with urgency. I want you also to legislate to give the Mental Health Commission the statutory power to regulate CAMHS. And finally, can I ask that your colleague, the Minister for Mental Health, meet with Families for Reform of CAMHS, study their report, hear their views and bring about the changes that they are asking for.
Well, thanks very much, Laskin Corlin. I want to thank Deputy MacDonald for raising what is an extremely important issue, and one that I share your view on, that more needs to be done and that we need to make much more progress on. And I want to particularly thank you for raising the case of Maggie, and indeed I'd be very happy to make contact with Maggie's mother and indeed to engage in any way that I can. I understand that the Minister for Mental Health has met that group that you've referenced, and indeed very happy for further engagements with I think that's Families for Reform of CAMHS, and very happy to have that ongoing engagement, as I know Minister Butler is as well. Look, for people watching it at home, CAMHS provides obviously a range of services to people, children and adolescents in need of mental health services. And evidence shows that around 2% of children and young people need the support of specialist CAMHS multidisciplinary teams. As detailed in the HSE's National Service Plan for this year, CAMHS expects to receive about 23,000 referrals over the course of the year. Now, I can point to figures that are true, that do show we have seen a very significant increase in mental health service funding year on year, and indeed the funding now over €1.3 billion in 2024, with a strong focus within that budget for investing in youth mental health, and quite rightly and properly. There are some encouraging signs, though I accept we have a lot more to do in this space. There were 3,583 children on CAMHS waiting lists in April 2024, far too high, far too many. But that did represent a decrease of 778 compared to the previous year. So there is some signs that as we invest more, as we staff more, and as we reform the services, we are seeing improvements in wait times in relation to CAMHS. The data has also shown that around 95% of urgent referrals to child and adolescent mental health services in April were responded to within 72 hours as well. And of course, the severity of presenting symptoms as well as assessment of risk is always taken into account in terms of waiting times, with every effort made to prioritise urgent cases so that referrals of young people with high-risk presentations are addressed as soon as possible. There has been a significant increase in mental health staffing numbers that you've referenced. There's been an increase of 476 in mental health service staffing numbers between December 2021 and December 2023. And this year we also have 68 new posts allocated under budget 2024, and HSE Child and Youth Mental Health Care will have over 130 new posts under the €10 million recently announced by the Minister for Mental Health. My understanding is that HSE is working to recruit for those vacancies as quickly as possible. So I do want people to know that there is funded posts currently that the HSE is endeavouring to fill. So I want to assure you that that's not an issue in relation to embargo or recruitment pauses, that there are funded posts that we're currently trying to fill as well. More broadly, we do now have a dedicated National Office for Child and Youth Mental Health within the HSE. This is a very significant development that has been delivered by the Minister, because it will provide that leadership, that operational oversight and management of all the service delivery and improvements. So can I absolutely assure you this is an issue I'm very happy to work with you on. I'm very happy to do as you request in terms of ensuring that there is direct and ongoing engagement by government with families for reform of CAMHS. I'll certainly follow the outcome of that report closely. We will continue to invest more in terms of budget and more in terms of staff in our mental health services as well. I should also say, from a legislative point of view, because I know you raised points in relation to that, the new mental health bill will be published shortly, and I do think that's a real opportunity for us in this House to work cross-party to overhaul and update mental health legislation. I look forward to working with deputies on all sides of the House in relation to that.
Thank you, Taoiseach, and you're right to say that the Minister met with the families, but that happened in October. We're now in June, and there has been no progress from their perspective, and they're very disappointed with that fact. Every day, every week that these children are on waiting lists or denied services is really, really damaging for them. Damaging in the here and now and damaging to their future prospects. So with the greatest of respect, Taoiseach, to tell me that a waiting list of 3,583 is an improvement on a previous scenario is no comfort at all. That's a deeply, deeply unacceptable situation. I raised the issue of staffing with you and the embargo, and you seem to dismiss the staffing concern, but of course, as you know, the Psychiatric Nurses Association is balloting for strike action, such as their concern in respect of the staffing of services. As a matter of fact, they describe mental health services at a critical tipping point, and they raise very specific concerns about CAMHS. You've been very slow with the legislative piece, but I want to come back to the embargo. That needs to be lifted. The recruitment needs to happen unhindered, and the teams need to be filled if these children are to have any chance of getting the services they need. Thank you, Gaelcholáiste.
So thanks for raising the issue again, Deputy, but I can assure you the word dismissive or dismissing is something that you can could never attach to me or this government when it comes to this issue. This is an issue that I know everybody in this House and everybody in Ireland wants to make more progress on. We have seen a very significant increase in mental health presentations, particularly amongst younger people post-COVID, not just in Ireland but internationally. We know the impact that the last number of years have had on our youngest citizens. But what I can say to parents watching in today, and what I can say to young people watching in today, that waiting lists are falling. And everybody that's taken off that list, it isn't cold comfort. It's actually a real benefit to a young person, to their family, to their community. Staff are being recruited. We can have debates about recruitment levels and workforce planning in the HSE, no problem, happy to do that. But in relation to this, we shouldn't mislead accidentally or otherwise in relation to this, because there are funded posts, 130 additional posts for the very services you're talking about that will be recruited during the year. The bill that we're bringing forward, the mental health bill, will deal with that issue of oversight of CAMHS teams, all 76 of them. So a lot of work underway in this area, a lot of good work, a lot more work to be done, and the government will have ongoing engagement with that advocacy group that you mentioned.
Yesterday, the Low Pay Commission recommended the abolition of sub-minimum wages for workers aged under 20. And I can't say that any of us were surprised by this recommendation, because maintaining a discriminatory system for young people could never have stood up to scrutiny when evaluated on the evidence. We all know that young workers have rent to pay, they have living expenses, they are affected by hikes in the prices and the cost of living and the prices of everyday goods, prices of travel and the cost of transport, and all the normal expenses that we see so many people struggling to cover through this cost of living crisis. It's true that there's a way still to go, but as our school completion rates become the envy of other countries, and I want to acknowledge that, the rationale for pay discrimination, which leaves young people so vulnerable, simply cannot hold water. And this is an argument that the Labour Party has made for years, and indeed Labour Youth have been spearheading a campaign on sub-minimum wages for workers aged under 20 and on their abolition, and we've been campaigning also under the message that Ireland needs a pay rise, that we do need to tackle the really serious levels of low pay across the country. And I want to pay tribute to all those who've campaigned on this, and indeed to the members of the Low Pay Commission for this important recommendation. The Commission itself was established by my Labour colleague, Deputy Jed Nash, and it's an important body. And I hope, Taoiseach, that you and your colleague, Minister Peter Burke, will now act on this recommendation without delay. I welcome also the recommendation that a review mechanism should be built in to ensure that there are no unforeseen consequences arising from a change in policy. But it is important that we see that the recommendations acted upon. Taoiseach, we know that campaigns on workers' rights are not always a popular endeavour, but we must recall, and we in Labour are particularly mindful of this, that workers' rights are core to the welfare of our communities. Workers' rights dictate whether economic success is worthwhile, whether it trickles down to communities. Workers' rights make the difference for us all between living to work or working to live. And they impact on our health, on our housing, on social cohesion of our communities. They're foundational. They're foundational to us as a party, but they're foundational to our communities across the country. In recent times, we had seen what appeared to be a shift within Fine Gael towards a not entirely convincing commitment to workers' rights. But even that slight shift appears to have changed again in recent months. And Taoiseach, our concern was that the advent of a new energy in Fine Gael has meant the advent of a dangerous precedent for those bodies which have been pushing for better conditions for workers. We've seen some public efforts being made from within your party to exert influence over the Low Pay Commission to slow down progress towards a living wage for those lowest paid workers in Ireland. So Taoiseach, in Leaders' Questions today, I would like to give you the opportunity to repudiate any rowing back of your party's commitment to workers' rights. I'm asking, will you act on the Low Pay Commission recommendation to abolish sub-minimum rates of pay for young people? And will you lead the charge in advocating for the introduction of a real living wage to ensure the lifting of all boats as our economy strengthens?
And thanks very much to Deputy Batchik for raising this important matter as well. And at the outset, let me say the government welcomes the publication of that report of the Low Pay Commission yesterday. The government, and specifically Minister Burke, will now give consideration to it. He will also carry out an economic impact assessment and then will make recommendations to Cabinet. I think that's the appropriate thing to do. I think we do have to always take a balanced approach in relation to these issues, and I'm very not going to get into a political ding-dong on this, but I'm very proud of my party's records and this government's records when it comes to workers' rights. And I can point to a number of things that we have done over the course of the last 4 years, whether it's increases in the minimum wage, whether it's the introduction of the statutory sick pay scheme, whether it's the parental leave bill, whether it's the work being undertaken by Minister Humphreys in relation to auto-enrolment into pensions, which will address the real pension apartheid that has existed for many years in this country, something I'm sure you feel strongly on as well. So we've taken a number of actions to help support workers, remote working as well, to try and support that work-life balance too. However, we also have to listen to people running businesses too. And I'm talking about people running businesses that many I'm sure you and I would have been in recent weeks and months during the election campaign, cafes, restaurants, small shops, who have pointed out that the pace in which charges and costs are coming at them has had a real impact. And what nobody wants to do in government, and I'm sure in opposition, is do anything that in any way hinders the ability of someone to provide employment in the town, in the village as well. So we will continue to support workers, and we will continue to support small and medium enterprises. And I don't buy into the idea that it's one or the other. It is about taking that balanced approach and the pace at which you do it. I should point out, though, obviously the sub minimum wage currently is a percentage of the overall minimum wage. And as the minimum wage has increased, so too has that. So again, it is a statement of facts that I think the minimum wage rose by about 12% on the last occasion, which was very significantly above the rate of inflation. And that would have had a knock-on benefit for people on all forms of the minimum wage. The government does remain committed to the introduction of the living wage. So this is just a question of balance and pace at which new costs come, and how government best supports businesses that I know you know too are under real pressure. And I'm talking about the small businesses, I'm talking about the medium business, I'm talking about many of them that I would have met in your constituencies that have said to me that we need to just be cautious here in terms of the pace at which new charges come at government, come at business rather. So we will consider the report, we welcome its publication, we'll carry out an economic impact assessment, and Minister Burke will then bring proposals to Cabinet.
Well, Taoiseach, as you know, we've always acknowledged any steps forward on workers' rights, but we are very concerned to guard against any rowing back of workers' rights. And as you've acknowledged also, I've certainly engaged extensively with small businesses in my own constituency and elsewhere, and I'm conscious also that the Low Pay Commission is statutorily obliged to have regard to impact of their recommendations on business. That's already built in. So any attempt to review further or to build in some other review mechanism sounds like it's amounting to a political review. We're conscious, I think, Taoiseach, that 20% of workers in our country are trapped in low pay, and we need to address that, not just at national level but at EU level. And I did speak earlier to mark the election of my good friend and our Labour colleague Aodhán Reardon to the European Parliament, and I think his election and the fact that we now have an Irish MEP for the first time in a decade in the Socialists and Democrats group, it will make a difference, because it matters when Labour activists are in the room at national level and at European level. And the Minimum Wage Directive is a real game changer and can be a game changer for those trapped in low pay. It will mandate all member states to ensure a living wage by 2026. So I'm glad to hear your commitment to move towards a living wage, but I want to ask how you propose to implement this directive, and will you adopt the recommendation of the Low Pay Commission?
So let me acknowledge your success in the European elections and congratulate your colleague. I think he's still Deputy Reardon and his election to the European Parliament. So at the outset, let me say, and I know you wouldn't wish to misrepresent our position, there'll be no rowing back in relation to workers' rights. There's nothing that I have said, nothing that government has done, nothing that government has indicated that suggests a rowing back. The question, though, and it is a legitimate question, is about the pace at which costs come at small businesses. And that's why the government did carry out, prior to my election as Taoiseach, the government had carried out a cost of doing business review. It was carried out by the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment and by the Department of Social Protection. And that report has been sent to the Low Pay Commission for the very reasons you outlined, because it is statutorily obliged to take into consideration the cost of doing business and various the impact of that as well, to arrive at an evidence-based approach. So they now have that, and I've no doubt they will do the job, and I acknowledge the job that they do as well. Look, we generally make decisions around Low Pay Commission reports around budget time, not on budget day, but around budget time. And I think that's a good time to do it, because it allows you look at things in the whole. So that's what we'll do. There'll be an economic assessment carried out of that report now, and we'll make decisions around budget time. When would you like it?
Tháinig bogar aiguidí an tríú ceist an grúpa regúnach I cheachta Sean Kenny.
I just want to raise the issue around the affordable housing scheme.
Yes.
Galway County Council are finding it very difficult to actually put schemes in places in towns such as Tuam or Ballinasloe, which are Tuam being the largest county town, or Loughrea or Gort or Athenry, on the basis that the figures are not stacking up. At the moment, we're faced with affordability schemes will be in Clare Galway, Ardmore and in Galway City. Because the structure by which the scheme has been drafted sets out density levels, and they are linked then to the supports that come from government. The cost of land, the cost of finance, especially upfront finance, and the absence of any open market values in these areas is really and truly raising barriers to getting a scheme that can be deemed to be affordable for the purchaser, for the young couple who want to buy the house, and get approval from the department. So basically, in essence, what I'm saying is that linking density of housing developments to the amount of support that you will give towards an affordable scheme is actually flawed, and it's actually leaving large towns without the opportunity of providing these affordable housing schemes that are needed. And if I take Tuam as an example, there's about 9,000 people there, and we haven't had one private housing scheme constructed since 2007 or 8. We have a housing crisis, and we have, and I will acknowledge this, built an awful lot of social housing, but we need to provide houses where people can get their mortgage, they can have an affordable mortgage, be able to live without being a prisoner to the mortgage. So we need to make the affordable scheme more flexible, and do not try to have it in a way that one size will fit all. There's a huge amount of towns around this country, I think, who would be in the same situation. And coupled with that, if you take the smaller villages, not the lesser villages, like my own Corofin or Abennockmoy or other towns like that, who cannot build because they have no wastewater scheme. And a board plan Orla has deemed that any development of a housing scheme in these towns or villages is premature until the wastewater treatment plant is delivered. And on top of that, we have a situation where existing housing estates, which have private wastewater treatment plants, are not being taken in charge by the local authority or by Irish Water. And if there are infill sites in these developments, they cannot get planning permission to build them out. So there are three issues that are affecting delivering houses to people who want to pay for them, who want to get them at an affordable price, and I would ask you to carry out a review of it. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Deputy Canny for raising these matters. And in the first instance, let me say that government wants to remove any barriers that exist to the development of housing and housing schemes like you've indicated. So certainly I'd be concerned when I hear a deputy like yourself highlighting those important issues in terms of them being perceived to be barriers in your community. I'm very eager to work with you and work through the structures in Galway to see how we can address some of them, because look, the issue of home ownership is the biggest issue of our time. The issue of, I suppose it's an issue that's created intergenerational anxiety now. Not just the young person worried, will they ever be able to buy a home, but the mum worried, the dad worried, the grandparents worried too. And we want to ease that intergenerational anxiety. And we are now seeing building homes at levels not seen since 2008. We are now seeing 500 individuals or couples buying their first home each and every week. And we have, so far this year, seen over 350 homes start to be commenced to be constructed every working day. I mean, these are very encouraging figures, and I say that from the point of view of hoping to be able to demonstrate to people that from a housing supply point of view, there are some encouraging signs. I want to thank you for your acknowledgement in relation to social housing, because sometimes you come into this place and there'd be a suggestion that no social housing is being provided, where you're rightly saying in your community, in your constituency, you're seeing a very significant level of social housing being provided, and that tallies with the national figures, because last year saw the highest highest number of social housing provided any time since the 1970s. In the last 50 years, last year was the highest number as well. However, we have a lot more work to do, and we need to be willing to listen to communities. We need to be willing to be more, as you say, agile and responsive to issues as they arise in communities. So with that in mind, we have, as you know, the Galway Housing Task Force. This is now being refocused under its new chairperson, John McCarthy. I understand it's meeting quarterly. It has a strong work programme to tackle what they would describe as Galway-specific issues. I believe it actually met as recently as yesterday. It has 2 more meetings scheduled already, one for the 6th of September and one on the 28th of November. And I'll ask that the specific issues you've raised be fed into their consideration too, to see if progress can be made. And I know the Department of Housing stands ready to respond to any outcome from that task force too. In relation to the issue of wastewater specifically, as the Deputy is aware, both Clarenbridge and Crockwell were successful in being approved for funding last December. This was a very successful scheme. I want to acknowledge the work of Minister O'Brien in bringing it forward. I think it was a clever idea to try and empower people locally to make progress on wastewater. It's really important to us that we see these projects being successful so that we can then have a further phase of rollout in those small towns and small villages really specifically that you reference as well. There are now cost rental projects approved in Galway City. This is going to see homes delivered on the old Monivea Road in Ballybrit by Tua next year as well. But let me take on board the specific issues you've raised. Let me ask the Galway Housing Task Force to look at them in conjunction with the Department of Housing, and we'll continue to liaise with you.
Thank you, Taoiseach. And I do acknowledge that Clarenbridge and Crockwell, and not before time, have been given an allocation to put in the wastewater treatment plants. The fact is, and the reality is, that there is a list of 30 more centres like that in Galway. And when Minister O'Brien first announced the funding for the funding call, it was probably 3 years ago, and it was only in December that an announcement was made of where the money was going to go. And this kind of long drawn-out process has got to stop. And we need to take this, take it seriously, in the sense that if we are to provide houses and provide affordable houses, we need to provide the infrastructure that is required. And we can't, at the same time, leave people who were living in houses which they bought back in the 2007, 8s, 9s and 10s, where there's private wastewater treatment plants. They left with the responsibility to actually maintain these plants, whilst at the same time they're paying their mortgages, they're paying their local property tax, they're paying everything else, and they seem to be left in limbo, with the developers having washed their hands, with the Irish Water having washed their hands, and with the local authorities having washed their hands of all of this problem. And I think the government needs to have a look at this as well. It is particularly prevalent in the west of Ireland, and in particular in Galway, where private wastewater treatment plants are not being taken into charge by anybody. Thank you.
There's a lot of hand hygiene, a lot of people washing their hands here. Well, let me assure you, we won't wash our hands of our responsibility to deliver for the people of Galway in terms of housing supply. I'm pleased with the progress that we're making in relation to social housing, as you acknowledge. I also acknowledge we need to do more in relation to that, and we continue to be ambitious in relation to social and affordable housing. But there's also a hell of a lot of people in this country who want to buy their own home. There's a hell of a lot of parents who want to see their adult child buy their own home. And we have a responsibility to listen to communities, to listen to builders, and to put schemes in place. There are reasons to be encouraged by housing supply. When you see almost 33,000 new homes built last year alone, exceeding the target. But let me be absolutely clear. This is a government that intends to lift the scale of our ambition in terms of housing supply. We'll publish draft housing figures, housing targets this summer, finalised ones this autumn. And as part of realising them and reaching them, we will have to work with the likes of the Galway Housing Task Force to see how county by county we can raise the scale of ambition.
Michael Collins.
Thank you. Taoiseach, you have publicly stated that you support hard-working local businesses that employ so many people in rural towns and villages. Airbnb hosts also fall into the category of hard-working local businesses. They form the bedrock of visitor accommodation in rural and coastal areas throughout the island. For example, their contribution to the success of the Wide Atlantic Way, now in its 10th year, is beyond question. The extra footfall and spin generated by their guests is essential to the survival of local businesses and their employees. The guests eat in the cafes, restaurants and pubs, go kayaking, whale watching, hill walking, visit distilleries and museums. And that's not just in West Cork, it's throughout our island. In 2023, tourism generated 12 billion 2.5% of Ireland's GDP and supported over 5.1% of the national workforce. The Wild Atlantic Way alone generated $3 billion. Airbnb hosts also provide accommodation for the following uses: relocation, remote working, contract workers on weekly assignments, agency healthcare staff. Taoiseach, Airbnb hosts in rural and coastal areas are now fearful of losing their livelihoods if the proposed registration of short-term lets requires planning compliance within a 6-month period. With no clarity as to what this would entail, many hosts who are over 55 host in their own homes and depend on this essential source of income in locations where employment prospects are scarce. This allows them the dignity of creating their own jobs while working from home with a reduced carbon footprint, which is a constant cry from this government. To date, the Minister for Housing or Tourism has not properly engaged with these thousands of hosts in the short-term rental sector as recognised stakeholders. Minister Martin is said to be bringing forward a report soon, but how can she do this when she has not consulted with the people that could be most affected? This government's decision to railroad ahead with these proposals will have devastating consequences. You must immediately decouple the planning requirements from the new register until it has produced reliable data on the actual type and pattern of short-term rentals in Ireland. Taoiseach, thousands of Airbnb providers need you to recognise that the proposed legislation in its current form could kill Ireland's tourism industry and the livelihoods of thousands of rural employees as early as 2025. Airbnb hosts are not the solution to the housing problem. They are the solution to a thriving local and national tourism economy, supporting local jobs for local people. Taoiseach, do you understand the crisis these hosts are facing, and what is your solution to the thousands out there of top quality tourism providers who may face wipeout due to these new proposals?
Just a gentle reminder, that's a silent phone, just a gentle reminder to everyone.
Well, look, thanks Deputy Collins for raising this issue. I certainly understand the challenges being faced by the tourism sector, and this government here is trying to balance local housing needs and tourism and economic needs as well, and we've got to get that right. So what the proposed bill is intending to do is to provide a statutory basis for the establishment of a register for short-term lets in Ireland, and indeed implementing the EU short-term rental regulation, which was adopted by the European Union on the 11th of April of this year as well. So we intend to approve the bill shortly, publish it, and then draft it as well. I am aware of the letter that's been co-signed. I think I received it today, or I certainly saw it today, from a number of tourism and hospitality sectoral organisations, including the Irish Tourism Industry Federation, the Irish Self-Catering Federation, the Vintners Federation of Ireland, the Restaurants Association of Ireland, the Association of Visitor Experiences and Attractions, and Ireland's Association of Adventure Tourism. That letter has been copied to a number of government departments, and we will, of course, respond to each of the issues that have been raised there as well. But this is about trying to put a regulatory structure in place. What's a short-term let? What's available for people to rent. And I do think it's important we get this right. There would have been, quite rightly, requests from opposition and government benches. Often deputies on all sides of the House would raise this on questions on promise legislation. It comes up a lot in the constituency offices. So let's not create a bogeyman here. We're not trying to, in any way, shape or form, do down the tourism sector. We rely on it. It's extremely important in all parts of this country, urban and rural. We'll get it right. But we are also seeing under Housing for All that this is an important measure to have that structure in place.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. And you have said there that you understand the challenges of businesses, and I could question that, because your part of the government had raised the VAT from 9 to 13.5%. That didn't understand the challenges that businesses were going through. But I'm talking about a completely different thing. You're saying regulation. The Airbnb sector are not afraid of regulation. They understand regulation has to be put in place. But if it requires planning for many of these homes who have been providing an excellent tourism service throughout the country, West Cork included, it will mean maybe tens of thousands of euros that needs to be spent on homes that they can't afford to spend. So that's where the issue is. They're not afraid of regulation. They're not afraid to sit down around the table, put things right and make sure that everything is in order, it's going ahead. But they do have that concern about the planning regulation that may be involved in this. And if this goes ahead, Taoiseach, the way it is, being reported that it's going to go ahead, it's going to wipe out the Airbnb services throughout West Cork and other places. And that's the concern of their country. As I said, they're not afraid of regulation. They're not afraid of sitting down around the table and making changes. That will provide a clear, detailed, clear going forward. But what they are worried about is the planning regulation. If the planning regulation comes in, that's going to simply put them out of business, and that's where they feel this is going.
No, look, I appreciate the sincerity of the point you're making, but I'd also say this: like we have to be honest in this house about Airbnb and about how much people can make on that over a couple of days versus renting out the place for a month. Like we have to have a balanced conversation. There's either a housing emergency in Ireland or there isn't, and let me be clear, there is. And if there is a housing emergency and a housing crisis, and there's young people, no, I'm sure you would have told these young people during the local and European elections, it's good to continue that honesty after it. I'm sure you would have looked them in the eyes, Deputy Collins, and I'm sure you would have told them you're going to do everything in the Dáil, and your councillors and your MEP and whatever else are going to do everything to help them get a home. Well, so am I. And that involves taking decisions in government, not just defining the problem, not just saying which bandwagon will I jump on today. There's legitimate issues that the tourism sector have. We will work with them. We value them. We need them. It's an important part of our economy, not just in rural Ireland, but in all parts. I've been to your constituency, and on the main street of Kinsale, the main street, I heard the need for this. I swear to God I did. And I remember the mother who spoke to me on that street. And this government's not going to let her and her kids down. Okay, we're not going to let her and her kids down. So it's usual in parliamentary democracy that you'd wait and read the legislation. We'll publish it, read it, and then bring in your amendments. Let's have a debate on the floor of the Dáil. But don't do this usual thing of, oh, the government don't understand rural Ireland, oh, the government. Nonsense.
It's a scandalous answer to the people at Airbnb in West Cork.
And you should know better than to come up here and say something like that.
It's offensive.
Because that's an insult.
You should be ashamed.
That's an insult.
Resume your seat.
No,
Deputies, resume. Deputies,
You had a clue. You never answered the question I asked.
deputies, please. Deputies, resume your seat. Deputy.
You were offending.
Okay.
I don't need your permission.
Go mocking people like that. That's wrong. That's mocking. And you're wrong, Taoiseach. And you know, you're 62 days in the job. You should know a lot more than that.
Why are you upset?
Deputies, I'm 4 years in the job, and never once have I been ignored in this manner. It's just not acceptable. Through the chair, or I'm going to now abandon the Dáil, and I don't wish to do that. Deputy, I'm asking you for the last time to show a little respect for the chair, if nothing else. Thank you. Thank you. It's Deputy Collins' question. It's now finished. And I'm going to move on with promised legislation. Thank you. And I'd ask for your cooperation. Thank you. If we could have cooperation from both sides, that would be very helpful. Tá méid bogará go dtí ceistena maidir le policy an rialtas agus reachtaíocht atá gealta ifar a héin ceachta Mary Lou MacDonald.
Gurmagat Las Cairncorla, I want to raise the issue of the stadium at Casement Park in Belfast. As you know, Taoiseach, this is a flagship executive project. Indeed, it's a key and a joint commitment, not just amongst the parties of the executive, but between Dublin and London also. You know that the opportunity to be part of hosting Euro 2028 was cited as a further incentive to get this project done. I am very, very concerned that the current British government, the Tory government, is walking off the pitch with a bag full of broken promises. Taoiseach, can I ask you today to reiterate the commitment in respect of funding for this project, the delivery of this project, and the expectation here in Dublin that whoever is in government, whoever is in number 10 Downing Street, that commitment will be honoured in full, and that the stalling, the delay, the bad faith, the broken promises will end, and that we will see Casement Park constructed in West Belfast. Gurmaigh.
Thank Deputy MacDonald for raising the issue. So let me absolutely assure you that the government has been absolutely clear that we want to see a redeveloped Casement Park delivered in time to host the Euro 2028 Games, and that's why our funding commitment was confirmed in February. The Casement Park development, as you know, redevelopment is owned and managed by the GA, working with the Northern Ireland Executive. It is for these partners to confirm the overall funding approach to deliver the redeveloped stadium. While it is for UEFA to confirm, it's understood that the UEFA decision in principle on hosting Euro 2028 matches at the redeveloped Casement Park in Belfast will be made in the coming weeks. But we remain absolutely committed, and I intend to continue to pursue this and work with the Northern Ireland Executive and the British Government.
Look, I have to back you.
Taoiseach, today workers from the National Advocacy Service are striking. They provide an essential service for disabled persons, for adults with disabilities, and yet they do not receive fair pay. And they have exhausted all other means for addressing their low pay issues. They've been to the Workplace Relations Commission and to the Labour Court. There's been a recommendation of a pay rise, and yet management are refusing to implement that, we understand. We know the strike will have a huge impact on disabled people who rely on National Advocacy Service staff to assist them in crucial tasks. And we've called on the government to intervene to demand that a fully state-funded organisation would respect the recommendation. We do need to see action to resolve this dispute and to protect the vital services provided by National Advocacy Service staff. So Taoiseach, can you reassure the House that every action is being taken by your government to resolve this issue urgently?
I can indeed, Deputy Batching, and thanks for raising it. I want to see this issue resolved. So does Minister Humphreys. I know the excellent work that the National Advocacy Service do. You're quite right to outline it. My understanding is that efforts did continue late into the night to try and reverse that strike, that all parties were involved, including officials from the Minister's Department and representatives from the CIB. Look, I understand, and I don't say this to be critical, but I understand that the unions didn't feel in a position to call off the strike on that occasion. But I do hope that the discussions could continue during the course of the day, and let's get people back into process.
Social Democrats, Dr. Holly Cairn.
Taoiseach, a recent interview with the Minister for Agriculture demonstrated everything that's wrong with the government's approach to agriculture and climate change. Asked about the nitrates derogation, the Minister was clear. He said he was not even contemplating a scenario in which Ireland loses its derogation. How can a Minister proudly declare he's not going to plan for what is a very, very likely outcome? We all know that agriculture runoff is primarily responsible for damaging water quality and biodiversity. It's a reality the government needs to face up to. We have more evidence today from another EPA report that found water quality remains in crisis. It found there has been no overall improvement in water quality despite efforts, and time is running out to fix that. Taoiseach, you know the derogation can't last. So why is your government pretending otherwise, denying reality and leading farmers to a cliff edge again?
Thank you.
Will only devastate more family farms.
Thank you,
when is the government going to do its job, and how will you support derogation farmers to change their ways?
So I don't agree with you at all in relation to saying that we know the derogation isn't going to continue. It's absolutely the position of Ireland at a European level to continue to seek to maintain that derogation, and that's the position that I as Taoiseach will make at the European Council when these issues arise. I'm concerned that it's a position you wouldn't make if you were in government, because we do need to improve water quality. I fully agree with that. We share the EPA's concern that there is no indication yet of an overall net improvement in water quality. But we do have a very particular, unique grass-based system here in Ireland. Our climate and our soils do justify the derogation, and I don't think we should suggest it's a matter of improved water quality or keeping the derogation. We need to improve water quality whilst maintaining the derogation. That's what Minister McConalogue is going to lead the government's effort on, bringing together a task force, industry, farmers, government departments and others. And if you look at chemical fertiliser as one example, we've seen the use of that down by around 30% in 2 years. We have a lot to do on water quality, but I do believe it's possible to improve water quality and maintain the derogation.
I want to go back to the report by the Low Pay Commission, and it recommended the abolition of all sub-minimum wage rates for all employees. And I think we'll all agree that, there's age discrimination in terms of pay in this country, where, people that are 16 get, 30% less than somebody that's 18 that's doing the same job, which is bizarre, right? But this time last year, People for Profit put a bill forward in terms of addressing all these anomalies in relation to pay. So, as the famous chef used to say, here's the one I prepared earlier. So this can be enacted with your goodwill. So we'd hope that you would consider this bill in terms of the overall restructuring of low pay in this country.
Thanks for preparing one earlier, and Deputy Kenny, and thanks for raising this issue, as I know you do on a regular basis. The position of the government now is to consider the Low Pay Commission's report. I think it was published yesterday. Minister Burke, Minister Higgins will give it consideration. They'll carry out an economic assessment. It'll be considered in the context of a range of issues in advance of the budget, and we expect to be in a position to deliver the government's response in advance of budget day.
Ja.
This morning I met with the INTO outside in Buswells where they're doing a presentation, and basically I've had calls as well from a lot of school principals in relation to the capitation grant which they're getting. It's €200 per child and it's there with 13 years. Also the ancillary services grant is again it's dated. And it's true to say that the government have provided once-off funding post-COVID to help these schools, but they're at a stage now where they need the capitation grant and the ancillary grant increased because they cannot afford to employ their caretakers, they cannot afford to do anything outside of normal, and they're actually using the reserves they have to try and pay for running costs within the school. And I think it's something that in this budget needs to be looked at in the long term, and to update the capitation and these grants by an amount that will make the difference between survival and not. Thank you, Taoiseach.
Thanks very much. The budgetary process, I think it's earlier every year, and look, I understand very much the serious issues that the INTO raise. I thank them for raising it. I know from my engagement with schools that these cost pressure schools are facing are real. Government does want to obviously help support our schools. Obviously the way we'll do that is through the budget. I think we have good form in relation to this because you referenced the extra funding we provided to deal with COVID costs, the unparalleled capital budget in terms of extensions, expansions and refurbishments to schools, and the significant improvements that have been made in pupil-teacher ratios, SNA numbers and special educational needs. We'll look at all of the issues around how best to support our schools in the budget, and I thank the INTO for their submission today.
Taoiseach, when are you going to do something with Irish Water? From the very construct of that entity, the transposition of the infrastructure, they never took over the combined sewers underneath houses and behind houses. I speak today of Castle Road in Tipperary town, and I want to mention Christy Keenan, the late Christy Keenan, councillor who's been buried tomorrow, but a number of residents, and a large number of them, older residents, and the house is 110 years old and older. They have a huge problem with sewage, and Irish Water would not look at it. I would not go near it. The county council says it's Irish Water problem, and they say, and I've seen photographs here, and they're horrific. You wouldn't see them in a third world country with the amount of sewage inside in the houses. Insurance companies talking about condemning the houses. And Irish Water, and this is not only in Tipperary town, this is happening in every town and some villages in the county Tipperary and every place else. So they have to go back to the drawing board. I brought in private members' bill to try and get that legislation changed. It simply happened in England and legislation was changed. They have to look after this infrastructure that was put in by the county councils when these houses were built 100, 200 years ago in some places. And there's old pipes and underneath the houses and underneath the extensions. So please, please, have somebody do something for the people in the situation.
McGrath for raising the issue, join with him in extending the sympathies to the family of Councillor Christy Kinahan at this difficult time. And I'll ask the Minister for Housing to specifically consider the issues you've raised in relation to Tipperary, but also the more broader impact, and revert to you directly.
Marion Hartley.
Ireland published the State of Ireland Caring Report 2024, and one of their asks was to abolish the means test for carers. Now, I listened to you yesterday because you responded more than once, and you said that right now you are making changes to the income disregard for carers, and that's right. But let's be clear, the outworkings of last year's budget means that carers had to wait until June 6, 2024 to see an increase in the income disregard for carers allowance. And while it's welcome, it is so long overdue. At one time, the income disregard for carers allowance was the same as the average industrial wage. Minister Taoiseach, at an absolute minimum, we need to reinstate that position. And further, family carers are also asking that the means test be abolished over the next 3 years to 2027, when a participation income can be put in place. And I'd like to ask Minister for your perspective on that.
Thank you, Deputy Harkin, for raising this issue. Yes, I'm delighted that today we have expanded the income limits for the means test for carers, 900 for a couple per week and 450 for a single person. We continue to work with the carers groups and will continue to do so. We have made some significant changes, particularly in terms of a pension for long-term carers, and that was introduced earlier this year. So a lot of work is going on in that space. There is a working group currently looking at it between the Department of Health and my own department, and we'll continue to engage with them. Thank you.
Christopher O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Laskin Corla. Taoiseach, Dunmanway and Clonakilty, they're two of the most important towns in my constituency. They're separated by about 20 kilometres, and it takes just over 20 minutes to drive from Clonakilty to Dunmanway, for example. But if I wanted to take a bus there tomorrow, it would take me about 2 hours, because I'd have to go via Bandon. So what the people of Dunmanway and Clonakilty need is a direct bus service from Dunmanway to Clonakilty. Speaking of Dunmanway, I want to congratulate the organisers of the Feel the Force Festival. It's a Star Wars themed festival, an absolute success. There was Wookiees, Stormtroopers, there was Jedi Knights. And I'm not sure if Harrison Ford or Natalie Portman or George Lucas or Mark Hamill watched all proceedings, but if you are listening, I would ask that you would attend the festival next year. It'll be on again next year. Or Taoiseach, maybe you could reach out to them and invite them to come to Dunmanway to the Feel the Force Star Wars Festival next year. Thank you.
Sure, I'd have any success, Deputy Sullivan. I'm happy to advocate on your behalf, and congratulations to the organisers of Feel the Force. Look, I take the point you make, the serious point you make in relation to Dunmanway and Clonakilty at a time when we're trying to obviously encourage people to be able to use more public transport, and particularly the need to do more in rural Ireland. I know Minister Ryan's very committed to this. I'll raise with him directly that point around the need for that direct bus service. May the force be with you.
Yesterday I hosted Family for Reform of CAMHS, and this is what we learned. Under this government's watch, CAMHS waiting list has reached a record high, CAMHS beds has reached a record low, and children with intellectual disabilities and mental health problems are falling through the cracks. Children with dual diagnosis of mental health issues and autism are being passed from pillar to post, and children with ADHD are waiting far too long for treatment. The Families for Reform of CAMHS informed us that 92% of children's mental health deteriorates while they're waiting for the referral to be processed, and 74% of the mental health deteriorates while they're waiting for an appointment. One parent said, "Fighting for my son to get support has broken us as parents. I can't even imagine how our son feels." And despite your earlier response to Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald, there is a recruitment embargo in CAMHS. The psychiatric nurse associations are balloting their members, such as their concerns about this embargo. So can I ask that you lift this embargo immediately, because Taoiseach, children just cannot wait any longer.
Taoiseach, Minister to respond.
Thank you very much for your question. Just to reiterate what the Taoiseach said already, whereas there is a moratorium in relation to some issues, there's no moratorium in relation to consultants, as you know. There's no moratorium in relation to newly recruited, trained nurses. But this year, 130 whole-time equivalents will be recruited into mental health services, with 80% of them predominantly into CAMHS. There is no moratorium in relation to this. This is recurring funding, which means that they will be in place again next year. I met with the HSE in the department 2 weeks ago. Recruitment is underway, and we will continue to work to do everything we can to strengthen CAMHS teams all over the country, all 76 of them. But I do think it's fair to point out as well that last year CAMHS teams allocated 225,000 appointments. 225,000 appointments to young people the length and breadth of the country. And I understand there are some difficulties in relation to children who would have dual diagnosis, but we're working hard to try and make sure the pathways are clearer.
Requested from the Library Research Centre on Dyspraxia accommodation state exams regarding extra time by Dr. Itnet Howlett, Senior Parliamentary Researcher. I would ask that a full review be conducted on the current State Examinations Commission's position regarding extra time for students with dyspraxia. At present, under the current rule, 10 minutes extra time may be granted per exam. However, dyspraxia students who are currently not eligible for additional time have campaigned for more time to complete exams. In fact, Dyspraxia Association of Ireland have garnered over 20,000 signatories demanding extra time. Currently, Ireland is an outlier on this issue when compared to dyspraxia students in countries such as France, Italy and England. Will the Taoiseach agree to holding a full review on this issue? Margaret.
raising the issue and for the work you've done with the library research service here. What I'll certainly undertake to do is ask that report and review you've gotten commissioned is considered by the State Examinations Commission, and I'll ask Minister Foley to do that as well. I'm conscious that this is an issue that we all hear coming up in our constituencies as well, around students with dyspraxia and indeed often students with dyslexia. So I'll ask that your report, if you want to send it to me, I'll make sure it goes to the right place.
Thank you.
For a long time now, as the Minister of Social Protection will know, I've been making a case for the reform of the means testing of social welfare payments and how it operates. A lot of the provisions there date back a long time, and a lot of the disregards have not changed over time, some have. And I did welcome very much the setting up by the Minister of a review of means testing. And this was promised, I think, initially by the end of last year. What I was wondering is, could you, or the Minister, outline to me when it's now intended to publish this report and whether its recommendations will be considered in the context of this year's budget, or are we going to lose another year in bringing about absolutely vital, necessary reform?
Key for raising this, because you've raised it with me on a number of occasions. I've just come from a management board meeting earlier this morning, and it was the very same thing that I've raised as you have asked me. So the answer is I'll have the report. I'll have it very, very shortly, and I'll be happy to share it with you. And you have brought forward a number of suggestions to me, and I have asked that they be included, because I know it's something that you and I are very much like-minded on, and we want to move this on. And because some of our means that we have improved on some of them, we've improved on the carers, and we've increased the amount of capital you had for a number of different schemes. But there's a few that we really need to look at, and I'll be happy to share it with you, and I expect to have it in the next week or two. So thank you.
Richard Bruton.
Ago, Taoiseach, we had 1.8 million at work, and adding 100,000 to that was deemed wildly optimistic. Today we have 1 million more at work than then, and what we need is a strategy to build the capacity of the public service to deliver for this bigger and more ambitious working population. We need to build at scale both public infrastructure, the move to net zero, harnessing AI. And I think this is an incredible opportunity, but it needs bolder ambition and greater innovation. And I really welcomed your signalling at the National Dialogue that we need to build the capacity of the public service. The question I have for you is, how is that to be done? Will we anticipate a white paper in this sphere? Because it offers huge opportunity, not least in an area you're familiar with, health, where predictive health, better management of conditions could be transformative.
This issue, and I should say, and I think it's a fair comment, that there's many people at work today, thanks to the work you did with your action plans for jobs and the likes, when this country was in the depths of recession, and it did show how when you put that focus in relation to employment and enterprise, you can make real progress. So to thank you for that. I did make those comments at the National Economic Dialogue because I do think we need to now right-size the state, and I don't believe the public service is of adequate size or where it needs to be in terms of reform and modern delivery. I cited good examples of good practice where we've seen the likes of passports online, but other examples that are nowhere near where they need to be. I think we face as a country both the challenges and opportunities of a growing population, and we need to make sure that we're harnessing those opportunities. So I have asked my officials to consider exactly how best to take that forward, so we can answer the question as to what should be the appropriate size and operation of the public services in Ireland into the future. I'll be back to you when I have a final view on how to take it forward.
Violet and Wynne.
Raise the important matter of the pressing necessity of granting or designating independence to Gaelcholáiste and Clár in Ennis. It's so pressing because they first submitted their application in 1994, so 30 years on. I think we can all agree that it is high time that they receive that designation now. We know locally that there is an accommodation crisis in second level schools in Ennis. In fact, all schools, when surveyed by the ETB, welcomed the establishment of an independent Gaelcholáiste. There are 4 Gaelcholáiste at primary level with approximately 700 pupils, and 3 of those schools are outside Ennis. They're in Shannon, Moy and Kilrush, and they're deprived access to the free school transport scheme because of the current designation as part of an English medium school under the roll number of Ennis Community School. On the 2nd of October 2021, Minister Foley said it was under consideration. Can we move ahead, Taoiseach, with that designation, maybe even for September, coming for them to have their roll number and that designation?
To Deputy Wynne, I'm not across the detail, but it does sound like an extraordinarily long period of time and an extraordinarily long campaign. I will talk to Minister Foley directly about it. We're very eager to support the development of Gaelcholáiste, particularly where there is such a demand. And so I'll talk to Minister Foley and ask her to revert to you on it.
Dr. Martin Brown.
Taoiseach, you said earlier to Deputy Kenny that you won't wash your hands of the people of Galway, and that's great news. But your government has washed their hands to the retained firefighters in this country. And I question the commitment to the retained firefighters who yesterday had to return to the WRC because of the failed commitments that you've given them. You've given them commitments, but the offer you put on the table to them is pittance, and is actually an insult to the retained firefighters who put their lives on risk every day of the week for us. Why are you forcing them to go back to look for more money, which he had promised them? You're going to force them back out on a picket line, and I can guarantee you they had massive support the last time, and that support is still there. So be very, very careful that you don't push it too far. Look we saw yesterday 72% of family carers are looking for that commitment. So what's your intentions to our firefighters? Is it purely words again, or will you act to support the people, like I said, that put their lives on line every day of the week for us?
Thank you, Taoiseach, to respond.
Thanks, Laskin Corla. I want to assure you we fully support the retained firefighters and our firefighters generally. We very much value their work, and it's important that the value of their work is recognised in their terms and conditions. I know in my own county the incredible work that they do, and I know across the country as well. So following acceptance of the WRC agreement last September, the Department of Public Expenditure agreed the retainer payment made to retained firefighters could be examined in the next round of pay talks. During the pay talks, stakeholders agreed the following position in relation to the retainer payment. It said the parties commit to remain in process with a view to concluding the current retainer and associated attendance commitments for retained firefighters. Officials from the Department of Housing and the LGMA are leading the engagement with staff representatives to conclude the process. Parties were unable to reach a positive conclusion on the 31st of May. They referred the matter to the Workplace Relations Commission, and all parties, I believe, are continuing to work together on full implementation, and we remain absolutely committed to seeing out this process.
Taoiseach, there is a minimum wage in this country, but the law allows an employer to pay below it if the worker in question is under the age of 20. It is legal to pay a 19-year-old 90% of the minimum wage, an 18-year-old 80% of the minimum wage, and those aged 17 and under just 70% of it. But yesterday, the Low Pay Commission unanimously recommended that you abolish these sub-minimum pay rates. Instead of embracing this proposal, your Enterprise Minister said that he would have to apply the SME test before making recommendations to Cabinet. And I don't think your comments earlier in this session were satisfactory either. There are no circumstances which justify paying an 18-year-old's €10.16 an hour in this day and age. There are no circumstances which justify discriminating against a 19-year-old when he or she performs the same work as a 20-year-old. There is never an excuse for exploitation. So in conclusion, I want to ask you today to commit to implementing these recommendations by January the 1st. It's the right thing to do, Taoiseach. Will you commit to it?
To respond.
Firstly, I don't think employers in cafes and restaurants and hotels, many that we all know in our community, aren't exploiting younger people. I think they give them opportunities. I think they provide them with summer jobs and part-time work and during their college period. And I don't see any evidence of exploitation. And you should really reflect very carefully on that charge in this. It's a very strong charge to make against small and medium businesses in your own constituency, and I reject it out of hand. The government follows process. The Low Pay Commission has done a report. The Low Pay Commission produced a report. We'll consider the report and we'll make a decision in advance of the budget. That's the normal process.
Street in Drogheda called Narrow West Street goes back to medieval times. It's a historic street. At the moment, neither traffic nor pedestrians can go through because unscrupulous developers bought and held on to a listed building, built in 1760, which must now be demolished because it's fallen into a very dangerous state. It appears to me that the Derelict and Dangerous Sites Acts need to be overhauled and action needs to be taken, that historic buildings like this, streetscapes like Westgate, must not be allowed to fall into utter dereliction that is there now. I appreciate your interest and your knowledge in Drogheda and your commitment to meet people there, but it is absolutely unforgivable that somebody can hold on to our buildings, let them fall into dereliction, let them be demolished by the council, and they don't have a penalty for that. One of the penalties must be that all costs which the council have to bear must be paid by them. And like the Drogheda Grammar School, I will fight to ensure that that building rises again from the dust and debris so that our history and our historic buildings will not be allowed to happen again in this country.
Thanks very much, Leslie Corla. I have no doubt you will, and I know your passion for Drogheda, your passion for your town, and indeed your passion for this issue. And I'll certainly talk to the Minister in relation to the Derelict and Dangerous Sites Act and see what the plans are in relation to that. I also look forward to meeting very shortly with you, with representatives of the community in Drogheda, to talk about this task force, because we really need to finish the job here in relation to Drogheda. We've had the Drogheda implementation report. Don't think the people of Drogheda have been listened to on all occasions by all agencies of the state, and I want to work with you on that task force idea we discussed a few weeks ago.
Agus an issue to Michael Healy-Ray.
Thank you very much, Leslie Caller. Taoiseach, Recovery Haven are here today in the AV room from Tralee, representing 26 cancer support centres. They offer psychological and emotional support for cancer patients and their families. Unfortunately, in our ageing population, 1 in 2 people will suffer from cancer. Some of the statistics, that centre, Recovery Haven, they're dealing with 17 new cases this month, 44 in May and 58 in April. They are requesting a commitment and allocation of $5.5 million in the core funding in the 2025 budget. In 2024, the 26 member groups that they operate centres throughout the country had an operating cost of $11.1 million. But I'm sure you would agree, Taoiseach, that these type of cancer support centres, families who are going through the journey of cancer, they need support, be it psychologically and emotionally and in every way. And I know firsthand the great work that they do in Tralee, and I want to commend them for it.
Well, thanks, Deputy Healy-Ray, and thanks for raising this important issue, and thank you to Recovery Haven for being here in Leinster House today. I think you're right. We need to support these groups. That's why we did make that allocation, as you say, in the budget. My understanding is, not to speak for them, but my understanding is they want to know that that's going to be increased and going to become core so they can plan for the future. That certainly sounds logical in terms of being able to give them that clarity into the future. It is a key part of our national cancer strategy as well to recognise that these are crucial partners, as you say, with the state and with the patient and with the person in terms of their cancer journey and their families. So thank them for their work, and I will work with you and colleagues across the House in advance of the budget on this matter.
Agus an issue to Moynihan.
Service, which is a hugely valid service throughout the country and is keeping people longer in their homes. The HSE have, in their wisdom, families and people that avail of the service build up a huge rapport with the home healths that they're working with, and they have been working with them for a long number of years, for 2, 3, 4, maybe 10 years. But now the HSE have, in their wisdom, said that they're going to rotate the home health the home care assistants, and they'd only be working with a patient 1 week out of every 3 or 1 week out of every 4, and that there would be no continuity in terms of the care that's provided in their own homes. I think it's a retrograde step, and I would ask the Taoiseach and the government to look at it, because I think that the rapport that's built up gives comfort to the patient, and also it builds up a rapport with the home care assistant as well. So I'd like to have that review stopped.
And the really important issue of home care. So today, as I stand here, 56,000 people will receive home care the length and breadth of the country, and I am lucky to have a budget from the government of 730 million to make sure that we can deliver as much home care as possibly. Since this government came to power, 4.1 million extra hours of home care. And when you consider that, 4.1 million extra hours of home care over the last 4 years. In relation to the specifics in West Cork, or Cork South West at the moment, and in your own particular area, there have been changes made by the HSE. We saw the same changes made in Waterford over the last 2 years. And the purpose is to put a team in place in an area where there would be 4 people that the person would be familiar with. The whole purpose behind it is because some people who need 7 days care 3 times a day, you can't have the same person providing that care, especially at the weekends and at bank holidays. So teams have been put in place that you would be familiar with. If you have any specific issues, I can have a look at it for you. But the whole purpose is to make sure that we have staff readily available Saturdays and Sundays as well.
Tommy Charam now, but with the Taoiseach's cooperation, we'll take the last Dr. Rose Conway one.
This is a really important issue, and it's around eating disorders. And can it really be the case, Taoiseach, that there are only 3 public specialist adult eating disorder beds in the country? And can it then be the case that those 3 beds are in Dublin? And Minister, have you said that there's no need for additional 20 inpatient beds? Because between 2018 and 22, 718 adults presented to the HSE with a primary diagnosis of an eating disorder. I want to ask you for a solution here. I have too many of these people living in my constituency. I have a 20-year-old girl who's 37 kilos. Nobody in the HSE will help her. Nobody. And this happens to so many. Sent home, told to wait until your weight gets lower and lower, until your organs are all damaged, and then you go back in through A&E again. I am begging you to please help these people with eating disorders that need help. Thank you.
Minister.
Categorically, that the amount of investment into eating disorders over the last 4 years has been unbelievable.
Oh no, please.
Deputy, would you let